I rewatched Atlantis: The Lost Empire for the first time since getting my linguistics degree recently, and wow, there is a lot to talk about. There's a lot that this movie does wonderfully right, and a lot that it does horribly wrong. It's been a long time since a movie has made me feel this conflicted, so I'm excited to show you some things you may have missed. Starting out on a positive note, a very detailed constructed language, or conlang, was specially developed for this movie by linguist Mark Okrand, who is himself an expert in dead languages and is perhaps best known as the creator of Klingon and Vulcan. Milo Thatch's character design was actually partially based on Okrand. You can find a lot about the structure of the Atlantean language on Wikipedia, but just to give you an idea, it has a subject, object, verb, word order, adjectives go after the noun, and adpositions are only postpositions. There are at least 7 grammatical cases, over a dozen suffixes that show verb tense and mood, as well as suffixes indicating first, second, and third person, singular, and plural subjects. The spoken language also has specific rules, such as emphasized syllables usually using the tense form of a vowel, and unemphasized syllables usually using the lax form of the vowel. Also, a special shout out to Larry Rogers, who compiled and annotated this complete corpus of all official Atlantean, from which I got the vocabulary and grammar for this video. Mark Okrand also developed a writing system for Atlantean. These are all of the symbols that were designed, but only these symbols were actually used in the film. All of the other letters wouldn't have an equivalent in Atlantean because those sounds don't exist in Atlantean, or they're letters that make multiple different sounds. These symbols were only created so that one-to-one ciphers could be made for promotional materials. Atlantean is written boustrophiron, meaning that the first line is written from left to right, the next line is written from right to left, and so on and so forth, mimicking the flow of water. It's very clear that as a linguistic consultant, Okrand put a lot of love into the language of this movie, but it's also important to note that the writers of this script were not linguists writing a movie about linguistics. This movie was meant to be, first and foremost, an adventure movie, the likes of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea or Journey to the Center of the Earth. So you can understand how they would make some mistakes. On that note, let's listen to renowned linguist and cartographer Dr. Milo Thatch here talk about why he's so sure that he knows where to find the Shepherd's Journal.
Now, based on a centuries-old translation of a Norse text, historians have believed the journal resides in Ireland. But after comparing the text to the runes on this Viking shield, I found that one of the letters had been mistranslated. So, by changing this letter and inserting the correct one, we find that the Shepherd's Journal, the key to Atlantis, lies not in Ireland, gentlemen, but in Iceland.
I really do hate to nitpick this early on, but where do I even begin to explain everything that's wrong with this? Let me start with the most obvious and I'll work my way down. Number 1. Why do you need to compare it to a Viking shield when the mistransliterated rune was correctly transliterated right there in the same text? 2. This is a centuries-old translation of an Old Norse text. Why is it a one-to-one for English? We have a specific historical context for why our letter C makes both a k and a s sound, but Old Norse doesn't, so these runes would actually be pronounced something like Coast of Ikiland. 3. These specific runes fell out of use by the time Iceland was founded. And 4. Many of the runes on this shield do not appear to be real. Even when I tried to compare them to the closest thing I could find, it still just spelled gibberish. The most frustrating part of all this is that it could have been avoided if they used younger Futhark runes to spell out the name in Old Norse, because Ireland and Iceland are also just one rune different in Old Norse, Irland to Island. Doesn't solve the fact that the same rune is used in multiple places, though. Watching this movie with almost any level of knowledge about linguistic research almost makes you side with the board that keeps rejecting Milo's proposal. There's this one scene after they find the Atlanteans where Milo is info-dumping about Atlantean, and I know it's really just supposed to be background noise, but if you really break it down and listen to it...
And what's really amazing is that if you deconstructed Latin, you overlaid it with a little Sumerian, throw in a dash of Thessalonian, you'd be getting close to their basic grammatical structure. At least you'd be in the same ballpark.
Someone's having a good time.
Like a kid at Christmas.
Well, obviously you don't pick...
Commander, there were not supposed to be people down here. This changes everything.
This changes nothing.
Bronze Age. Take that, Mr. Harcourt.
Milo is so frustratingly vague in the presentation of his ideas, and you'd really think he'd be more athletic given the number of conclusions that he jumps to. Once again, where do I begin? What are we deconstructing about Latin? It's possible to deconstruct the meaning of a text and analyze it for biases, etc., but he's making a point about the grammar of Latin. Grammar is structure, so what are we deconstructing to find these similarities that he's describing? Next, overlay? What are we overlaying and how? You can't just say a little of this or a dash of that like you're my mother-in-law trying to teach me how to make pozole, okay? Please be specific about what parts of the language are being compared or deconstructed. Also, as far as I can tell, Thessalonian is not a real language. Milo's claim that this bizarre amalgamation's apparent resemblance to Choctaw grammar is evidence of a common root language is just absurd. Even if two languages are compared as they are with no need for any amount of deconstruction or overlay, as he put it, even in that context, striking similarities found between languages are not enough to justify a claim that the two are related. Coincidental similarities are found all the time, especially when casting as wide of a net as the New World, and even casting as wide of a net as he did in search of similarities, he's gonna need a more convincing level of similarity than it being, quote, in the same ballpark to prove, quote, once and for all, his incredibly bold claims. Okay, one last dig at Milo before I change topics.
My name's Milo.
My name is Kiragagash.
Kiramashnaga. Hey, you got a nickname?
Okay, Mr. Expert in Dead Languages. Something I always found strange about this movie, even when I was a kid, was how easily the outsiders communicated with the Atlanteans. The lore's explanation here is that Atlantean, and every single language on Earth, are asymmetrically intelligible, meaning that speakers of language A can understand speakers of language B, but speakers of language B have a hard time understanding speakers of language A. In this movie, however, they can not only understand it, but also flawlessly speak these languages that they've never heard before. Let's watch this initial interaction between Kida and Milo.
Neshigitim gabrin defenyo. Lebesa nachtap duarentop. Let's all do benechtap.
I think it's talking to you.
Lebesa nachtap duarentop. Let's all do benechtap.
Leb a senec dop do weren top. Let's all do penect up.
Prawitim dan ganak making you gibletot bet kaperekek.
Kag wegene preed.
Kag wegene. Wegonos pridos es esanen.
Ida suamice viator.
This is linguam Romae.
Parlez-vous français?
Oui, monsieur. How do they know all these languages?
Their language must be based on a root dialect. It's just like the Tower of Babel.
So, this concept of a single mother language that all modern languages descended from is called by a few names. Proto-human, proto-sapiens, proto-world, and a few others, but it's exceedingly difficult to find any credible evidence for its existence. It would have been spoken at the very least 50,000 years ago if it did exist, so any daughter languages would have become completely unintelligible by the time we had any direct evidence for them. There have been many attempts, but the hypothesis doesn't seem to have very wide support. Linguists have, however, been able to find evidence for some very, very old languages by comparing similarities among a variety of languages and looking at how different languages have changed over time. Historical linguists can reconstruct some vocabulary and grammar in ancient languages. The most extensively studied reconstructed language is Proto-Indo-European, which is said to be the common ancestor of many distinct and far-reaching modern languages. As for the prehistoric polyglots over here, I know that I do not have to tell you this is not how this works. But the real frustrating thing is that they didn't even really need to do this. The only person that the Atlanteans interact with at length is Milo, and anytime any other person on the crew interacts with the Atlanteans, Milo is present. If Milo is an expert in Atlantean in this fictional world where Atlantean is an attested and well-researched language, they very easily could have just had him translate for them. But instead, we get this interlingual interaction that's only slightly better explained than the one from Pocahontas.
Who are you?
Pocahontas.
What?
Another interesting thing I noticed about spoken Atlantean is a difference in pronunciation between Kida, played by Cree Summer, and the Emperor, played by Leonard Nimoy, namely in the O sound.
Nagim teneb top top top.
Kidu toet.
Danganak making new geblet.
Usile toet.
This is likely due to Mark Okren's transcription style for the script. The actors wouldn't be able to read the International Phonetic Alphabet naturally and smoothly, so the script was written in a way that the sounds of the words would be more intuitive to English speakers. The O sound was often represented with the letters OA in the script, alluding to English words like soap and boat. However, it seems that Nimoy pronounced these letters separately, making an OA sound. I feel like Eric Singer right now. It's not the actor's fault, it's just a lack of time for proper training. One last extremely confusing aspect of this movie was the complete illiteracy of the Atlanteans. When Milo and Kida are asking each other questions about each other's worlds, Kida is very surprised that Milo is able to read Atlantean because...
No one can. Such knowledge has been lost to us since the time of the Mabelmok.
Oh, the Great Flood.
It's an alphabet. Your language has remained completely unchanged. The pronunciation is exactly the same now as it was then, and nobody thought to use these centuries of time at their disposal to try to crack this thing. This narrative really makes the Atlanteans dependent on an outsider to teach them about their own culture. There's writing all over Atlantis. Kida was a little girl at the time of the Great Flood, but do you mean to tell me that the Emperor couldn't read? What is happening in Atlantis? Why does Kida say their culture is dying?
We are not thriving. True, our people live, but our culture is dying. We are like a stone the ocean beats against. With each passing year, a little more of us is worn away.
Atlantis has always been a bit strange in its presentation of how the Atlanteans are doing.
1,000 years ago, the streets were lit, and our people did not have to scavenge for food at the edge of a crumbling city.
The people are content.
They do not know any better. We were once a great people, now we live in ruins. The kings of our past would weep if they could see how far we have fallen.
Kida is adamant that the Atlanteans are in dire straits and in need of help from outsiders, but I feel like that's not being shown to me as a viewer. It looks to me like the people are thriving. They're still engaging in cultural arts like tattooing, their lights are on, and they're eating well. Why can no one read? I was confounded by this for a while, but after a little bit of research, unfortunately, I think I can see the reason why they wrote it this way. According to producer Don Hahn, quote, "The directors often described the Atlanteans using Egypt as an example. When Napoleon wandered into Egypt, the people had lost track of their once great civilization. They were surrounded by artifacts of their former greatness, but somehow unaware of what they meant." Okay, so couple of notable words here. Wandered into is a super cute way of putting it. I probably would have gone with invaded. Second, the word somehow in this sentence is heavy. Look, I'm not an expert in Egyptian history, but it's clear here that, as usual, the answer is colonial. It's important to be aware of the words that we use because they actually affect our way of thinking about these issues. I don't think that the creators of this movie set out to write a story about a white guy who has to go save a nation of brown people from themselves. I really don't. But if we're not aware of how language can affect how we perceive these things, then we end up with blind spots that seep into our writing. Atlantis, as it's presented in the story, and Egypt cannot be compared. No one forced the Atlanteans to speak another language, no one is occupying their land, no one is erasing their history. Writing a story where a civilization is in a state of decay for no reason, where everyone just forgot their language for no reason, it creates a narrative that these things just happen. If there were ever a remake of this story, I just hope that this aspect would be treated with a little bit more awareness. Atlantis is an excellent adventure movie. The mystery, the characters, the action, the levity, the emotion, it's all there. But even though the main character is a linguist, Atlantis does not have a linguist spirit. It has an adventurer's spirit, it has a curious spirit, it has a spirit of fighting for what's right, but many of the things that make linguistics worth studying, such as how a language is acquired, how people jump over communication hurdles as they arise, the change of language over time, they just aren't a focal point in this story, and that's fine. But in case you're interested, I think that this movie has excellent potential to bring those themes to the forefront and to tie together some ideas that were hinted at throughout the movie. This is my fix-it Atlantis. For one thing, I would give the Atlanteans a good reason for the current state of their people. The crystal, the Emperor states,
The crystal thrives on the collective emotions of all who came before us. In return, it provides power, longevity, protection.
This concept of trading emotion for safety is super interesting, but I feel like this exchange would be more meaningful if it had deeper visible consequences for the Atlantean people. If, instead of feeding off of the collective emotions of Atlanteans long past, it was feeding off the emotions of living Atlanteans. That would be a proper explanation of how the Atlanteans have grown complacent and lost interest in trying to decode ancient Atlantean. And how as they run out of emotions for the crystal to consume, the lights start to go out and the buildings begin to crumble. This is a story about wanting to freeze a culture in time in exchange for what makes life worth living. This version is a story about hubris. Not the hubris of misusing the crystal's infinite power as a weapon, but in agreeing to make a trade for such power to begin with. If we look at the original Atlantis myth as written by Plato, we see that it's a story about hubris, the idea that a nation cannot and should not expand forever. It should not live forever. It should not seek infinite power. The people of Atlantis got greedy, stretched their empire too far, and were swallowed by the sea. The story of the Tower of Babel is another precautionary tale. As the story goes, mankind all spoke the same language until the humans decided to make a name for themselves by creating a great city in the form of a tower that reaches heaven. As punishment for their hubris, God scattered humanity across the globe and made the human languages unintelligible, leaving them unable to collaborate towards defying him again. In this movie, Atlantean serves as the mother language from before the Tower of Babel. It has remained completely unchanged for over 8,500 years, spoken the exact same way, day by day, century by century, millennium by millennium, by a people frozen in time. To any linguist, there's something very sinister here, something unnatural. Languages are meant to change. An unevolving language is a language spoken by a people who are completely uninterested in experimentation, in wordplay, in self-expression. A language is a living, breathing thing, completely symbiotic with a culture as its host. A language that does not change is dead, and its culture is too. I want you to consider that feeling you get when you realize that the kids today are starting to use words that you don't understand. That uncomfortable feeling that, if you haven't felt it yet, you surely will in the future, is in its ultimate form a fear of irrelevancy, a fear of aging, a fear of death. It's verbal evidence of the irreversible passage of time. And it's not only fear of your own irrelevancy and death, but also that of your culture and way of life. In my version of the story, Milo would still be a linguist who studies dead languages. He does so not only as a way to understand cultures in the past, but also as a researcher of etymology, which is, in essence, the study of change. He seeks to study Atlantean as a possible mother language and how the modern language trees evolved from it. The Atlanteans, being an isolated culture, only speak Atlantean. When Milo arrives in Atlantis, at first he's thrilled to find someone who can speak and understand ancient Atlantean. But as he realizes that this is every modern Atlantean's spoken language to this day, he's horrified. He knows that there's something wrong here. He soon finds that the people have forgotten their own writing system. It wouldn't be at all difficult to decipher with a little effort, but the people are apathetic. In a sense, they're on autopilot. They have no curiosity whatsoever about their culture's written word or how to pilot their ancient technology. They have no desire to be artisans or architects. There are no new buildings in Atlantis. Their infrastructure is crumbling because these deathless humans have needed to feed their emotions and drive to their power source in exchange for eternal life. For the majority of Atlanteans, the only strong emotion left is a fear of death. And in these circumstances, the streetlights begin to go out. Kita is the only one who has retained any sense of curiosity or desire for change, which, of course, draws her to the ever-curious Milo. My version of this story would be about accepting change and accepting a natural death. Although Latin, Proto-Indo-European, and the mother tongue of all, Atlantean, are considered dead languages, they didn't really die. They weren't killed, they just changed. Their fingerprints are still on the world's living languages. And just as ancient dialects live on through the impacts that they've made on modern languages, we also live on through the impacts that we've made on those who outlive us. In this version, the Atlanteans would give up their crystals and begin to age naturally, fully embracing the natural order, returning to the surface and committing themselves to learning about the outside world, its cultures, and its languages, maybe even taking classes from Milo. This version of the story would tie together common linguistic philosophies about accepting changes in languages while also being relevant to the warnings of the dangers of hubris present in the story's clearest inspirations. That's just my vision, but what do you think? Has this analysis ruined the movie for you? I sure hope not. It's still one of my favorites. What story should I analyze next? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more linguistic and world-building analysis.